morning. I'm Arlie Powell. We're at Petals from the Past Nursery and Farm in Jemison, Alabama. It is the very second day of spring as we begin looking at blackberries on this farm. We just recently had a freeze a few days ago, 2 or 3 days ago to be exact, of 29 degrees and 25 degrees. So I'll show you some things on these blackberries that we left off back in July, August when we first started developing the primocanes that would produce next year's crop. And now we're at next year, and we're going to show you how the plants have begun early this year, about 15 days before they should be growing. They're well advanced, and they're still about 10 to 15 days early. The blackberry is a aggregate fruit, and it means that the flower that's produced, the center of that flower has what's called a pistil, and that pistil is a female structure. And up and down a kind of a stem-like structure, you have individual little fruitlets, and those fruitlets comprise the fruit altogether. Now, the plant itself produces what's called, the botanist would call a cyme inflorescence. It has a primary flower, a secondary flower, a tertiary, and a quaternary, and sometimes more than that. We're looking at Kiowa, which is the one we've been working on in our other filming programs, and basically it is a floricane fruiting plant. That means last year when we were showing you the development of primocanes, they did not fruit. They simply grew vegetatively. Now we've got the second year, because once these plants fruit this time in this July of 2023, we'll be cutting all of these out, taking them out, and starting a new set of primocanes. And that's the norm for this type variety of blackberry. And this one, the plants that we're standing in, believe it or not, these are about 22 years old. And for a blackberry, that's considerably old. Most blackberries in commercial operations are terminated after about 4 to 6 years because of diseases and other things. But we've been able, with our system of TPUPS called Trellis Production, using Primocane Suppression, we simply suppress, and they're starting to come now. I cut some the other day. The new primocanes that'll produce still the crop in 2024 will be breaking through the ground here very, very shortly. As right presently, you simply see what was left from last year's primocanes now becoming floricanes, and we'll start picking these this year early. Normally about the second week, third week of May. We may be earlier this year into early May. Now, one of the problems that we've had is, and I can show you basically what I'm talking about. This little flower right here has shed its petals. It's turned brown because that 25-degree temperature killed it. It killed the whole plant, the whole flower, excuse me. But what we're looking at now, just to give you an idea, this is a primary, these are secondaries, tertiaries. The only flowers on this plant right now that will be valuable, that will be good, will simply be the lower, very, very small flower buds that haven't developed much. Now, if I take this top one and I cut it, what you see is a dead center, very black. That's the pistil, that's the female structure. So the cold killed it. Now, if I take the next one and I cut it, notice it's dead in the center also. So what that means is that although people would look at the flowers out here and say, oh my goodness, you have a great crop, they don't realize that the bees can come in and work these flowers, but there's lots of rich pollen, but there's no nectar or anything simply because they're gone. Now I'm taking the bottom fruit off of this one, and let's just take a look and see if it's, look at this. Even the bottom fruit on this shoot has a dead pistil. Now, if all of your shoots are like that, your crop will be exceedingly light. Now, I have cut enough of these to simply explain that if you have a good population of flower buds like this, and you have a lot of these small ones bunched right up against it, many of those, over half of those will be live, and that'll be your crop. And it's pretty easy for anybody to walk out, do a little cutting, and determine whether or not you need to fertilize your plants very much, because if there's not going to be any fruit, you certainly don't have to fertilize except in a small way. So this is information before you get real disappointed and you see all these flowers and nothing sets as to why that's happening. And most people don't realize that. This is a tough plant. These leaves wouldn't be killed until you got down in the mid to high teens. The leaves are fine, they're tough. But that flower component and the female structure is the weakness. And we haven't come up with any compound yet that we could rush in here and spray these plants with to prevent that from happening. There are certain things relative to the Kiowa blackberry that I would like to mention at this point in time as these plants begin, they resume growth and to produce their crop, and then they will be cut out of here because they die after that second season. But that's common. Now the crown of the plant lives for many years. But what I wanted to show was at this point right here, if this tie was not here, and this is what happens many times during the winter time and late winter, early spring, is that some of these, when we finish tying in October and get everything up here where we want it on our trellis, sometimes these hang down, sometimes they're not tied. So we always go through early spring, late winter, and if this, in other words, if the tie was where this finger is and this was not tied, it will lean down and it'll break off when the strong winds. So we always go to the end and we secure them, and we do this methodically this time of year. The other thing I wanted to show you in kind of closing out this session is the fact that we normally take off basal sprouts. Now, these, what happens is if I don't take some of these basal sprouts off, they're so low, you would think they would be okay, but they get in the way and a lot of them will just drop down into the ground. We try to keep the issue with E. coli on our fruit free of any problem. So what I'll do is if I've got one or two or three in here, I simply come in, and if I cut them, now I could rub them off with my hand, but some of these, since this is a thorny plant, you want to be careful about that. But about from the wire down about 6 inches, anything from that point up I leave, just like you see right here. Anything further down we take off. Now you can see some of the algae that's developing across the southeastern states that have blackberries. These little brown lesions are an algae that works on it, and so far we've managed to control this, and it doesn't go all the way through totally to the through the bark, and it's something we got people in Georgia and other places doing research on to correct. But you may notice that generally the plant, my experience is to date, that they'll still function quite nicely. They'll produce a crop, and then when you take them out, the disease cycle starts all over again. But this is ideally what I like. The cane up to the wire, 6 inches below, keep those for extra fruiting, and that puts you in good shape. Notice the two canes here separated where you can get in here and work. It makes it very nice. And these will literally just kind of cascade off of the wires, the two wires, and when they do, it makes it easy to come in here and harvest this fruit. and we have lots of people that come in and do that very thing.
Hey, this is Jason here at Petals from the Past, and if you're decided you're going to plant your blackberries in the landscape, or you're putting in a new garden, I'd like for you to kind of see what you could begin with. We start all of our plants typically as a 1-year-old blackberry plant. We grow many of them in a longer tube like this, some of them in a little shorter 1 gallon. But when you're starting it out, the important part is to make sure that you're planting these guys at the same depth that they were grown. So we've got a nice root system to work with here. That's going to go into the ground at the exact same depth that it was planted, digging the hole a little bit wider. And timing for this, we like to plant anytime between November and March. So December, January, February, winter months are great, and then go right on in through March. Generally by the 1st of April, we try to be done with it. But our soil here is red clay and rock, so we love to condition that soil with a good compost. This is composted manure. Our favorite brand typically has been Black Cow. It's a great blend to work with. It's 100% composted manure. We'll mix that in liberally with our existing soil. Take that blackberry out of the container, place it back in the hole, and make sure it's at the same depth that it was growing. Do a homogeneous mixture of your soil and compost back into that hole, tamp it in, and water it in real well that day. If you're in a period normally between November and March, here we're having regular rainfall, but at least once per week for the first 3 to 4 weeks after planting, you want to give it a good deep watering, and then you want to watch it that first summer, making sure that we don't dry out. So we typically are watering at least once per week, a good deep watering. We like to put a 2-inch layer of mulch, pine straw or pine bark mulch, either one is great. That's going to help keep the weeds down, keep the moisture in, and it helps to buffer the temperature as well. And so for blackberry planting tips, this is one tough plant. If you're trellising them, like we're looking at in our videos, it's always a good idea to start with a little stake like we have here, and that helps get them off to a good start. Anyway, we hope to see you here at Petals from the Past.